Have you ever felt that quiet pain of trying too hard for someone who barely tries for you? Have you ever waited for a message that never came, replayed conversations in your mind, and wondered what you did wrong? You told yourself to be more patient, more understanding, more loving, thinking that if you just tried a little harder, they would finally see your worth. But deep inside, you felt something breaking. Not because they were leaving, but because you were slowly leaving yourself. Buddhism teaches something the world rarely tells you. Love that must be begged for is not love. And the moment you understand this truth, you stop chasing what was never meant to be forced, and you begin to remember who you are without anyone's approval. 1. Love that requires begging is rooted in attachment, not compassion. Buddhism teaches that attachment is the silent cause of much of our suffering, because attachment quietly convinces us that we are missing something essential inside ourselves. It whispers that we are incomplete without a certain person, without their attention, without their validation, without their constant reassurance. And when the mind believes this story, it begins to cling. It begins to fear loss. It begins to panic at the idea of distance. When you feel the urge to beg for love, what you are often experiencing is not pure love, but anxiety disguised as love. It is the fear of being abandoned, the fear of being replaced, the fear that without this person your life will collapse into emptiness. That fear can feel intense and urgent, and because it feels so strong, we mistake it for deep love. But strength of emotion does not always mean truth. Sometimes it simply means attachment has taken control. Compassionate love, however, does not come from fear. It comes from inner fullness. When you love from wholeness, you are not trying to secure someone in order to feel safe. You are not trying to control their feelings or guarantee their presence. You are not constantly monitoring their behavior to protect yourself from rejection. Real love flows naturally between two people who choose each other freely, not because they are afraid of being alone, but because they genuinely value each other's presence. It does not require convincing, pleading, or sacrificing your dignity. It does not demand that you shrink your personality or silence your needs just to keep someone from leaving. It feels steady rather than desperate. It feels open rather than tight. When you must constantly prove your worth to someone, when you must repeatedly remind them of your value, when you find yourself explaining why you deserve respect or basic kindness, you are not standing in love. You are standing in craving. Craving says, if I lose this person, I lose myself. Craving says, I cannot survive emotionally without their approval. Craving makes you overextend, overgive, and overcompromise. It convinces you that your happiness depends entirely on someone else's willingness to stay. And because of that belief, you begin to tolerate things you would never normally accept. You ignore red flags, you dismiss your intuition, you silence your discomfort, all because attachment tells you that losing them would be worse than losing yourself. Compassion, on the other hand, says something very different. Compassion says, I care for you deeply, but I do not need to control you. It says, I choose you, but I am whole on my own. It understands that love is an offering, not a transaction. It does not beg to be selected. It does not fight for attention. It does not collapse when faced with distance. Compassionate love is grounded in self-awareness. It knows that your worth is not decided by who stays or who leaves. It knows that even if a relationship ends, your identity remains intact. The difference between these two energies, craving and compassion, changes everything about how you experience relationships. When you operate from craving, your mind is restless. You overthink small changes in tone. You fear silence. You feel anxious when responses are delayed. You constantly seek reassurance. But when you operate from compassion, your mind is calm. You allow space. You trust. You respect both your own boundaries and the other person's freedom. You understand that love cannot be forced into existence through effort alone. 2. The fear of being alone is often stronger than the desire for love. Many people believe they are fighting for love, but if they look deeply and honestly, they may discover they are actually fighting against loneliness. There is a difference. Love is warm, steady, and grounded in mutual respect. Loneliness, however, can feel sharp and overwhelming. It creates a sense of emptiness that makes you want to reach for anyone who can fill the silence. When the fear of being alone becomes intense, you may begin to tolerate situations that slowly drain your peace. You may stay in relationships where you are undervalued, misunderstood, or emotionally neglected simply because the idea of sitting alone with your thoughts feels more frightening than the discomfort of being half-loved. Buddhism teaches that suffering often arises not from the situation itself, but from our resistance to what is. When you resist being alone, when you label solitude as failure, rejection, or proof that you are unworthy, you create internal conflict. The mind starts telling stories such as, "Everyone else is loved except me," or "If I am alone, it must mean something is wrong with me." These thoughts feel real because they repeat themselves so often, but they are not truths. They are conditioned beliefs formed from comparison and social expectations. Society often glorifies constant companionship, making solitude appear like a problem that must be fixed immediately. But Buddhism invites you to look at solitude differently. It invites you to see it not as emptiness, but as space. When you allow yourself to sit in that space without rushing to fill it, something subtle begins to happen. At first, the silence may feel uncomfortable. Your mind may replay past conversations, past rejections, past memories of feeling unwanted. But if you stay present instead of escaping into distraction, you begin to observe those thoughts rather than becoming controlled by them. You begin to see that loneliness is not a permanent identity. It is simply a passing emotional state. Like all emotions, it rises and falls. When you stop running from it, it loses its power over you. The fear of being alone often comes from the belief that your value is measured by who chooses to stay in your life. When someone leaves, it can feel like confirmation that you were not enough. But this interpretation is shaped by attachment. In reality, someone's departure reflects their readiness, their capacity, and their path, not your inherent worth. When you understand this clearly, you begin to separate your identity from other people's decisions. You stop personalizing every ending. You stop assuming that solitude equals failure. Learning to be alone without feeling abandoned by yourself is a powerful transformation. It means you can sit in your own presence without needing constant validation. It means you can enjoy your own company, reflect on your thoughts, and nurture your own growth without depending on someone else to define your happiness. The more comfortable you become with solitude, the less desperate you feel in relationships. You no longer cling tightly out of fear. You no longer beg for attention because you are not terrified of losing it. When the fear of being alone fades, love becomes a choice instead of a necessity. You begin to connect with others from stability rather than insecurity. You seek companionship not because you cannot survive without it, but because you genuinely wish to share your already complete life with someone else. And in that shift, you discover something important. Being alone does not mean you are unloved. It means you are learning how to love yourself without conditions. 3. You cannot convince someone to recognize your worth. There is a quiet pain that comes from trying to make someone see what they have already decided not to see. You may speak gently. You may explain your intentions clearly. You may show loyalty, patience, kindness, and understanding again and again, hoping that one day they will finally recognize your value. But no matter how much effort you invest, Awareness cannot be forced into another person's heart. Buddhism teaches that every human being perceives the world according to their level of consciousness. If someone lacks the emotional maturity or inner clarity to appreciate you, no amount of proving, performing, or persuading will change that. When you try to convince someone of your worth, you slowly place your self-esteem in their hands. You begin to measure yourself through their reactions. If they praise you, you feel secure. If they withdraw, you feel inadequate. This creates emotional instability because your sense of identity becomes dependent on something outside of you. You wait for their approval to feel valuable. You wait for their attention to feel seen. You wait for their reassurance to feel safe. And in that waiting, you lose connection with your own inner knowing. Buddhism encourages awareness of this pattern. It teaches that suffering arises when we attach our sense of self to impermanent things. Other people's opinions are impermanent. Their moods change. Their feelings shift. Their perspectives evolve. If your worth depends on something so unstable, your peace will always feel fragile. The more you try to secure validation from someone who is inconsistent, the more anxious and exhausted you become. You may find yourself over-explaining your intentions, defending your character, or constantly justifying your actions just to be understood. But true understanding cannot be demanded. It either exists naturally or it does not. There is also a deeper truth that can be difficult to accept. Sometimes people see your value clearly, but they are not ready to meet it. Your depth may challenge their comfort. Your standards may highlight their insecurities. Your emotional awareness may expose their avoidance. In such cases, it is easier for them to dismiss you than to grow. When you internalize their inability as your failure, you create unnecessary suffering. You begin to shrink yourself in order to fit into their limitations. You soften your boundaries. You silence your truth. You make yourself smaller, hoping that if you become easier to handle, they will finally choose you. But shrinking never leads to real love. It only leads to resentment and self-betrayal. The lotus does not beg the mud to acknowledge its beauty. It simply grows according to its nature. In the same way, you were not meant to convince anyone that you are worthy of respect. Your responsibility is not to prove your value, but to live in alignment with it. When you act with integrity, kindness, and self-respect, you embody your worth rather than argue for it. The moment you stop trying to persuade someone to recognize your value, a quiet strength begins to form inside you. You no longer chase validation. You no longer exhaust yourself explaining what should already be obvious. You begin to accept a simple reality. Those who are meant to see you clearly will do so without force. And those who cannot see you are simply not aligned with your path. In that understanding, you reclaim your dignity. You understand that your worth is not something to be negotiated, debated, or proven. It is something to be remembered and honored from within. 4. Begging for love slowly destroys self-respect. There is something deeply painful about the moment you realize you have been abandoning yourself just to keep someone else. It rarely happens all at once. It happens slowly, quietly, almost invisibly. At first, you ignore a small comment that hurt you. Then you overlook a pattern of inconsistency. Then you silence your discomfort because you do not want to create tension. And little by little, without noticing, you begin to betray your own boundaries. You tell yourself you are being patient. You tell yourself you are being understanding. You tell yourself that love requires sacrifice. But there is a difference between healthy compromise and self-erasure. When you start tolerating behavior that makes you feel small just to avoid losing someone, self-respect begins to weaken. Buddhism teaches awareness of the self, not in an ego-driven way, but in a conscious and balanced way. To respect yourself means to remain aware of your own needs, your own emotional limits, and your own dignity. When you beg for love, you unconsciously send a message to your own mind that your value is negotiable. You begin to believe that your standards are too much, that your feelings are too sensitive, that your expectations are unreasonable, and because you fear abandonment, you start lowering the bar. You accept crumbs of attention as if they were a feast. You celebrate small gestures as if they erase repeated disrespect. You convince yourself that staying is strength, even when staying is slowly breaking you. The most dangerous part is not the rejection itself, but the internal dialogue that follows. When someone pulls away and you chase them, your mind may whisper that you must try harder. When they treat you as optional and you still remain available, your inner voice grows quieter. Each time you ignore your intuition to keep peace, you create conflict within yourself. On the outside, you may appear calm, but inside, resentment begins to grow, not only toward them, but toward yourself. You begin to feel frustrated, but you cannot fully express it because you are afraid of pushing them away. This creates emotional tension that drains your energy and weakens your confidence. Self-respect is not about arrogance or pride. It is about alignment. It is about standing in your truth even when it is uncomfortable. It is about recognizing that love should not cost you your dignity. Buddhism teaches the middle path, which emphasizes balance. Begging is imbalance because it places another person's approval above your own well-being. It turns love into a survival strategy rather than a shared experience. And over time, living in that imbalance creates suffering not just in the relationship, but within your own heart. When you consistently prioritize someone else's comfort over your own, you disconnect from yourself. You may stop expressing your real thoughts. You may avoid setting clear boundaries. You may tolerate disrespect because you fear that speaking up will cause distance, but distance built on honesty is healthier than closeness built on self-betrayal. The more you ignore this truth, the more you feel emotionally exhausted. You may start questioning why you feel so drained, not realizing that the exhaustion comes from constantly suppressing your authentic self. There is also a quiet loss of confidence that happens when you beg for love. Confidence grows when you trust your decisions and honor your values. But when you repeatedly stay in situations that hurt you, you teach your mind that you are not capable of protecting yourself. This weakens your inner stability. You may start doubting your judgment. You may think that maybe you are asking for too much, even when you are simply asking for respect. Over time, this self-doubt becomes heavy, and you begin to feel smaller than you truly are. Rebuilding self-respect begins with awareness. It begins with recognizing where you have compromised too much and gently correcting that pattern. It means understanding that walking away from what harms your peace is not failure. It is strength. It is choosing yourself without hatred toward the other person. It is saying, I value my emotional well-being enough to step back from what diminishes it. That decision may feel frightening at first because attachment fears loss. But self-respect values integrity over fear. When you stop begging for love, you do not become cold or distant. You become grounded. You stop chasing people who treat you as an option. You stop over-explaining your worth. You stop negotiating your standards. And in that stillness, something powerful happens. You begin to feel stable again. You begin to trust yourself again. You begin to experience relationships from a place of equality rather than desperation. Self-respect is the foundation of peaceful love. Without it, even affection feels unstable. With it, even solitude feels dignified. The moment you choose dignity over desperation, you send a clear message to yourself that your heart deserves care. And when you treat yourself with that level of respect, you naturally attract connections that reflect the same energy. 5. Real love feels peaceful, not anxious. One of the clearest signs that you are begging for love is the constant presence of anxiety in your heart. It may not always be dramatic or loud, but it is there quietly in the background. You may find yourself checking your phone repeatedly, rereading old messages, analyzing the tone of a single sentence, or wondering why their energy feels different today. Your mind begins to create stories. If they take longer to respond, you assume something is wrong. If they sound distant, you blame yourself. If they seem distracted, you question your worth. This emotional instability slowly becomes normal, and you start believing that this is what love feels like. But Buddhism teaches something very different. Love rooted in awareness does not disturb the mind. It does not create constant fear. It does not demand emotional survival. When love is healthy, it feels steady. It feels like calm water rather than a storm. You do not feel the need to perform in order to be accepted. You do not feel like you are walking on fragile ground that could collapse at any moment. Instead, you feel safe to express yourself honestly. You feel respected even when there are disagreements. You feel seen without having to beg to be noticed. There is emotional security in knowing that you do not need to fight for your place in someone's life. That stability creates peace in the mind. Anxious attachment, on the other hand, creates constant tension. It makes you hyper-aware of every small shift. It makes you overly sensitive to perceived rejection. You may start changing your behavior to avoid losing them. You may suppress your opinions to prevent conflict. You may hesitate to express your needs because you fear being labeled as demanding. Over time, this creates internal stress because you are no longer showing up authentically. You are showing up cautiously. And love built on caution cannot feel peaceful. Buddhism emphasizes inner balance. When something consistently disturbs your inner equilibrium, it is a signal to look deeper. If a relationship makes you feel insecure more often than secure, anxious more often than calm, confused more often than understood, then awareness invites you to question what is truly happening. Love should not feel like a competition for attention. It should not feel like a test you must constantly pass. It should not feel like you are one mistake away from being replaced. True love does not thrive on uncertainty. It thrives on clarity and mutual effort. When both people are emotionally present, there is less need for guessing and more room for trust. You do not spend your nights overthinking their silence. You do not replay conversations searching for hidden meanings. Instead, there is transparency. There is reassurance without being asked for it. There is consistency that builds confidence rather than doubt. Another important difference between peaceful love and anxious attachment is how you feel when you are apart. In anxious attachment, distance feels unbearable. You may feel restless, distracted, or incomplete when they are not around. Your mood may depend entirely on their availability. But in peaceful love, distance does not create panic. It creates space. You trust the connection even when you are not physically together. You continue living your life, focusing on your growth, your responsibilities, your passions. You do not lose yourself in the relationship. It is important to understand that intensity is not the same as depth. Some relationships feel intense because they are unpredictable. The uncertainty creates emotional highs and lows that feel dramatic and powerful. But intensity fueled by insecurity is not the same as deep, stable love. Buddhism teaches that clinging to emotional highs creates suffering because anything built on instability will eventually collapse. Peaceful love may not always feel dramatic, but it feels safe. It allows you to relax. It allows your nervous system to settle. It allows your heart to open without fear. When you stop begging for love, you stop accepting anxiety as proof of connection. You begin to value calmness over chaos. You begin to recognize that love should expand your peace, not threaten it. You understand that if you constantly feel uncertain about where you stand, something is misaligned, And instead of blaming yourself, you choose awareness. You choose to honor the quiet truth inside you that says love should feel like home, not like a battlefield. Real love does not require you to sacrifice your inner stability. It supports it. It does not create emotional confusion. It creates clarity. It does not make you question your worth daily. It reminds you of it. And if that kind of love is not present in your life right now, it is better to stand alone in peace than to remain attached in anxiety. Because peace is not something you should trade for temporary closeness. Peace is the foundation upon which healthy love is built. 6. Your worth is not determined by who chooses you. From a very young age, many people are conditioned to believe that being chosen means being valuable. In school, being selected by friends feels like approval. In relationships, being pursued feels like validation. On social media, attention feels like confirmation that you matter. Slowly, without realizing it, the mind begins to connect worth with selection. If someone chooses you, you feel important. If someone walks away, you feel diminished. But Buddhism gently challenges this belief and asks you to look deeper. It asks you to examine whether your value can truly rise and fall based on another person's preference. When someone leaves your life, especially someone you cared about deeply, it can feel like a personal rejection of your entire being. The mind may begin to search for flaws. It may ask questions such as, "What did I lack?" or "What could I have done better?" or "Why was I not enough?" These thoughts can feel convincing because emotional pain amplifies self-doubt. But awareness reveals a powerful truth. Another person's decision reflects their readiness, their desires, their fears, and their path. It does not define your intrinsic worth as a human being. Buddhism teaches that everything in life is impermanent. Feelings change, people evolve, priorities shift. Someone who once felt deeply aligned with you may grow in a different direction. When this happens, the ego may interpret it as rejection, but impermanence is not rejection. It is simply change. If you tie your identity to who stays and who leaves, you will constantly feel unstable because people's choices are not within your control. Anchoring your worth in something so unpredictable creates continuous suffering. There is also a subtle danger in believing that being chosen equals being worthy. It makes you dependent on external approval. You may begin to alter your personality to be more desirable. You may silence your opinions to be more agreeable. You may hide parts of yourself that you think others will not accept. All of this effort comes from the fear of not being selected again. But in trying to secure validation, you lose authenticity. You trade truth for approval. And even if someone chooses you under those conditions, you will feel anxious because you are not being fully seen. True self-worth does not fluctuate based on external circumstances. It is rooted in awareness of your inherent humanity. You are a conscious being capable of love, growth, compassion, and reflection. That alone carries immeasurable value. You do not need someone's decision to confirm that. When you begin to understand this deeply, your energy shifts. You no longer approach relationships as auditions where you must perform perfectly to be accepted. You approach them as equal exchanges between two whole individuals. It is important to remember that someone not choosing you does not mean you are lacking. Sometimes it simply means you are not aligned. Two people can be good individually and still not be right for each other. Their values may differ. Their emotional readiness may not match. Their life directions may not complement one another. These differences are not proof of deficiency. They are proof of individuality. When you stop interpreting misalignment as personal failure, you free yourself from unnecessary self-criticism. There is also strength in understanding that you were complete before anyone entered your life. Think about who you were before you met them. You had experiences, dreams, emotions, and strengths. Your existence did not begin when they arrived, and it does not end when they leave. The relationship may have added memories and lessons, but it did not create your identity. When you reconnect with this perspective, you begin to feel grounded again. You stop viewing yourself as someone who has been abandoned and start viewing yourself as someone who is continuing their path. When your worth is internal rather than external, relationships become healthier. You no longer cling desperately out of fear of being alone. You no longer chase people who are uncertain about you. You no longer feel shattered by every rejection. Instead, you remain steady. You understand that being chosen is pleasant, but it is not proof of value. And not being chosen is painful, but it is not proof of inadequacy. The moment you detach your self-esteem from other people's decisions, you experience freedom. You stop seeking constant reassurance. You stop measuring yourself against others. You stop competing for attention. You begin to stand quietly in your own presence with dignity. You understand that your worth is not something granted by others. It is something inherent, something that has always existed within you. When you live from this awareness, you do not beg to be selected. You do not chase validation. You allow connections to form naturally, and if they fade, you allow them to fade without collapsing your identity. You remain stable because your foundation is internal. And in that stability, you discover something profound. You were never waiting to be chosen in order to be enough. You were already enough, long before anyone had the chance to decide. 7. Letting go is an act of deep self-compassion. Letting go is often misunderstood as weakness. Many people believe that walking away means giving up, failing, or not loving enough. But Buddhism teaches something much deeper and far more liberating. Letting go is not about indifference. It is not about pretending you never cared. It is about releasing the grip of attachment that is causing you suffering. It is about choosing inner peace over emotional chaos. It is about recognizing when holding on is no longer an act of love, but an act of fear. When you beg for love, you are usually holding on tightly to the hope that things will change. You may tell yourself that if you are more patient, more understanding, more forgiving, more available, then eventually they will see your value and choose you fully. You replay memories of good moments to justify staying. You focus on potential instead of reality. You hold on to who they could be instead of who they consistently show themselves to be. This internal struggle creates emotional exhaustion because you are constantly fighting against what is happening in front of you. Buddhism emphasizes awareness of reality as it is, not as we wish it to be. When you observe clearly without denial, you may begin to see that the relationship is not balanced. You may notice that your effort outweighs theirs. You may recognize that your needs are often dismissed. You may feel that your peace disappears more often than it remains. Awareness can be painful because it forces you to confront the truth. But it is also freeing because once you see clearly, you no longer need to pretend. Letting go begins with acceptance. Acceptance does not mean approving of hurtful behavior. It means acknowledging that you cannot control another person's willingness to love you properly. You cannot force someone to show up emotionally. You cannot demand that someone value you in the way you value them. When you finally stop trying to control what is outside of you, a quiet relief begins to form. You realize that you have been carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. There is also a deep compassion required to let go, not only compassion toward the other person, but compassion toward yourself. When you cling to someone who does not meet you fully, you are often abandoning your own heart. You are ignoring your own pain. You are silencing your own needs. Letting go is an act of returning to yourself. It is saying, my peace matters, my dignity matters, my emotional health matters. This is not selfishness. it is self-respect guided by awareness. Impermanence is one of the central teachings of Buddhism. Everything in life changes. Seasons shift, feelings rise and fall, relationships begin and end. Clinging to something that is naturally fading creates suffering because you are resisting the natural flow of life. Letting go does not mean you erase the memories or deny the love that once existed. It means you allow the chapter to close without forcing it to continue. You honor what was without demanding that it remain forever. There is also courage in letting go. It takes courage to face solitude without immediately searching for replacement. It takes courage to sit with sadness without distracting yourself from it. It takes courage to admit that something you hoped for deeply is no longer aligned with your well-being. But this courage strengthens you. Every time you choose dignity over desperation, you reinforce your inner stability. You teach yourself that you are capable of surviving loss. You teach yourself that your identity does not collapse when someone leaves. Letting go also creates space. When you are tightly attached to someone who is not aligned with you, your emotional energy is consumed. You think about them constantly. You analyze every interaction. You replay every conversation. Your mind becomes crowded with what-ifs and maybes. When you release that attachment, you free mental and emotional space. That space allows you to reconnect with your passions, your friendships, your growth, and your purpose. It allows you to rediscover parts of yourself that were neglected while you were focused on keeping someone who was uncertain. Another important aspect of letting go is forgiveness. Not necessarily forgiving harmful behavior in a way that excuses it, but forgiving the situation for not unfolding the way you hoped. Forgiving yourself for staying longer than you should have. Forgiving yourself for ignoring red flags. Forgiving yourself for loving deeply. Compassion toward yourself softens the pain. It prevents bitterness from taking root. It reminds you that you were simply seeking connection, and that seeking connection is human. When you let go from a place of awareness rather than anger, something shifts inside you. You do not feel the need to prove anything. You do not feel the need to show them what they lost. You simply step back quietly. Your peace becomes more important than their attention. Your dignity becomes more important than their approval. You understand that love should not require humiliation. It should not require chasing. It should not require sacrificing your sense of self. There is also a powerful transformation that happens when you stop clinging. You begin to trust life more deeply. You trust that what is aligned with you will stay naturally. You trust that what leaves was not meant to remain. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop trying to control every detail. Instead, you focus on cultivating inner stability. You meditate on your thoughts. You observe your emotions without being overwhelmed by them. You strengthen your connection with yourself. In this process, you begin to see that being alone is not a punishment. It is an opportunity for growth. It is a period of rebuilding your foundation. It is a time to develop self-awareness and self-compassion. When you are no longer distracted by trying to maintain something that drains you, you can invest energy into becoming emotionally stronger and clearer. You begin to recognize patterns in your past relationships. You understand why you tolerated certain behaviors. You identify where attachment influenced your decisions. This awareness prevents repetition of the same cycles. Letting go is also an expression of faith. Faith not necessarily in a specific outcome, but faith in your own resilience. Faith that you can experience connection again in a healthier way. Faith that love built on equality exists. Faith that you deserve consistency and respect. When you cling, you operate from scarcity. You believe that this is your only chance at love. When you let go, you operate from abundance. You believe that love is not limited to one person or one situation. Over time, you may look back and realize that what you once feared losing was actually protecting you from something misaligned. You may see that the pain of letting go was temporary, but the peace that followed was lasting. You may notice that your standards became clearer, your boundaries became stronger, your self-trust became deeper, all because you chose to release what no longer served your growth. Letting go does not mean you close your heart. It means you protect it wisely. It means you choose connections that honor your values rather than challenge your dignity. It means you understand that love is not about possession or control. It is about mutual presence and shared effort. When that balance disappears, letting go becomes an act of alignment rather than loss. At the deepest level, letting go is about returning to yourself. It is about remembering that your identity is not defined by who stays or who leaves. It is about realizing that you are capable of standing on your own without collapsing. It is about understanding that peace is more valuable than temporary affection. And when you fully embrace this awareness, you stop begging for love. You stop chasing what runs from you. You stand calmly in your own presence. In that calmness, you rediscover something powerful. You rediscover that you are whole, even without someone beside you. You rediscover that your worth has never been negotiable. You rediscover that your heart deserves respect, including from yourself. Letting go, then, is not an ending. It is a beginning. It is the moment you choose yourself with compassion and clarity. It is the moment you understand that true love begins within, and from that inner fullness, all healthy connections will either stay naturally or fade without destroying your peace. 8. Being alone is not emptiness, it is the beginning of self-realization. There is a powerful illusion that many people carry quietly within them, and that illusion is this: being alone means something is missing. The mind quickly interprets solitude as failure, as rejection, as proof that something must be wrong. When a relationship ends, or when love is not present in the way you hoped, the silence can feel heavy. The house feels quieter, the phone feels still, the nights feel longer, and in that silence the ego begins to speak loudly. It says that you are behind. It says that everyone else has someone. It says that being alone means you were not enough. But Buddhism invites you to look at solitude from a completely different perspective. It does not see aloneness as emptiness. It sees it as space. And space is not something to fear. Space is where awareness grows. Space is where clarity develops. Space is where you begin to hear your own thoughts without interference. When you are constantly surrounded by noise, by validation, by attention, by distraction, you rarely meet yourself deeply. You are always reacting, responding, adjusting, accommodating. But when you are alone, there is nowhere to hide. There is only you and your mind. At first, this can feel uncomfortable. You may become aware of insecurities you ignored. You may notice patterns in your thinking that you never questioned before. You may feel waves of sadness or longing rise unexpectedly, but Buddhism teaches that these emotions are not enemies. They are teachers. They reveal attachment. They reveal fear. They reveal where you have been seeking fulfillment outside of yourself. When you observe these feelings without judging them, they begin to soften. You start to understand that loneliness is not a permanent condition. It is a temporary emotional state that changes when you stop resisting it. Being alone gives you the opportunity to build a relationship with yourself that is not dependent on external validation. You begin to ask deeper questions. What do I truly value? What kind of love do I genuinely deserve? What boundaries have I ignored in the past? What fears drove my previous decisions? Without the constant influence of another person's presence, your answers become clearer. You are no longer reacting to someone else's behavior. You are responding to your own truth. There is also a quiet strength that develops in solitude. When you sit alone and survive the discomfort without immediately reaching for distraction, you prove to yourself that you are capable. You realize that your happiness does not collapse in the absence of someone else. You begin to enjoy small things again: a peaceful morning, a walk without urgency, a book that inspires you, a hobby you neglected. Slowly, you rediscover pieces of yourself that were overshadowed by attachment. You begin to feel stable within your own presence. Buddhism often speaks about the illusion of the ego. The ego constantly seeks confirmation. It wants to feel important. It wants to feel chosen. It wants to feel superior or special. When you are alone, the ego feels threatened because it is not receiving constant reinforcement. But this is precisely where growth happens. Without external attention, you are forced to find meaning within. You begin to value inner peace more than external praise. You start to understand that worth is not measured by how many people desire you, but by how deeply you understand yourself. Solitude also strengthens discernment. When you are no longer desperate to avoid loneliness, you stop accepting any form of companionship just to fill the gap. You become selective, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. You recognize that peaceful aloneness is healthier than chaotic connection. You no longer tolerate being half-loved because you have learned to love yourself fully. This shift changes the way you approach relationships. You do not cling, you do not beg, you do not shrink. You stand firmly in your identity. Another important realization that comes from solitude is emotional independence. Emotional independence does not mean you do not care about others. It means your emotional state is not entirely controlled by them. You do not collapse when someone pulls away. You do not lose yourself when someone disapproves. You remain grounded because your foundation is internal. This grounding creates resilience. It allows you to experience connection without fear of annihilation if it ends. There is also healing that occurs in solitude. When you are constantly engaged in relationships, you may carry unresolved wounds without noticing them. You may project insecurities onto others. You may repeat patterns unconsciously, but in stillness, those wounds become visible. You may realize that you were seeking love to compensate for childhood rejection. You may recognize that your fear of abandonment started long before your recent relationship. Awareness of these patterns allows you to heal rather than repeat. It allows you to grow consciously instead of reacting automatically. Being alone also deepens gratitude. When you are not taking someone's presence for granted, you learn to appreciate genuine connection when it arrives. You no longer chase attention. You value quality over quantity. You recognize the difference between someone who is simply available and someone who is truly aligned with you. Because you are not afraid of solitude, you can wait patiently for meaningful connection rather than forcing premature attachment. It is important to understand that solitude does not mean isolation. You can be alone without being disconnected from the world. You can nurture friendships, family bonds, and community without relying on romantic validation for your identity. Solitude simply means you are not dependent on one specific person to feel whole. You stand complete within yourself, and from that completeness, all other connections become enhancements rather than necessities. Over time, you may begin to cherish your alone time. What once felt like emptiness now feels like clarity. What once felt like rejection now feels like redirection. You start to realize that being alone gave you something precious, self-knowledge. It gave you awareness of your boundaries. It gave you understanding of your desires. It gave you confidence that you can stand on your own without collapsing into desperation. When you internalize this deeply, begging for love no longer makes sense. Why would you beg for something when you already know you are complete? Why would you lower your standards when you have built peace within yourself? Why would you chase someone who is uncertain when you have learned to be certain about yourself? Solitude teaches you these answers not through theory, but through experience. In the end, being alone is not a punishment. It is preparation. It prepares you to love without attachment. It prepares you to choose without fear. It prepares you to walk away without hatred. It prepares you to recognize your own value without needing constant reassurance. And when you reach that level of awareness, you no longer see solitude as something to escape. You see it as a sacred space where you met yourself fully for the first time. From that meeting, everything changes. Love becomes an addition to your life, not its foundation. Companionship becomes a choice, not a necessity, and your worth becomes something steady and unshakable. In that awareness, you understand the deepest truth of all. You were never meant to beg for love, because even in your quietest moments alone, you were always enough. 9. When you finally stop begging, you become emotionally free. There comes a quiet moment in a person's life when something inside them shifts. It is not dramatic, it is not loud. It does not always come with anger or confrontation. It comes with clarity. It comes when you are finally tired, not of loving, but of chasing, not of caring, but of convincing, not of connection, but of constantly trying to secure it. And in that tiredness, something awakens. You begin to understand that begging for love has been costing you more than being alone ever could. Begging for love keeps you emotionally trapped. It keeps your mind in constant anticipation. You are always waiting for a message, waiting for reassurance, waiting for confirmation that you still matter. Your mood becomes dependent on someone else's behavior. If they respond warmly, you feel relief. If they withdraw, you feel panic. This cycle creates emotional instability because your peace is no longer yours. It belongs to their choices. And whenever your peace depends on someone else's attention, you are not free. You are attached. Buddhism teaches that freedom does not come from controlling external circumstances. It comes from releasing internal clinging. When you stop begging for love, you stop trying to control how someone feels about you. You stop trying to manage their perception. You stop trying to secure outcomes that are not within your power. This shift may feel frightening at first, because attachment feels like safety, clinging feels like effort, begging feels like action. And the mind often believes that if you just try harder, you can prevent loss. But trying to force someone to love you is like trying to hold water in your hands by squeezing tighter. The tighter you grip, the more it slips away. When you finally loosen your grip, something remarkable happens. Your nervous system begins to calm. Your thoughts slow down. You are no longer obsessively analyzing every interaction. You are no longer trying to decode hidden meanings in silence. You are no longer rehearsing conversations in your head to say things perfectly. You step out of the constant emotional survival mode. And in that space, you begin to breathe differently, more deeply, more freely. Emotional freedom does not mean you stop caring. It means your caring is no longer desperate. You can love without losing yourself. You can care without collapsing when someone does not respond the way you hoped. You can express your feelings without fearing that honesty will push someone away. When you are free, you no longer shape your identity around another person's reactions. You remain grounded in your own awareness. There is also a profound change in how you see rejection when you stop begging. Before, rejection may have felt like a personal attack on your worth. It may have confirmed your deepest insecurities, but when you are no longer clinging, rejection becomes information, not devastation. It tells you that the alignment is not mutual. It tells you that the connection is not balanced. It does not tell you that you are unworthy. This shift in interpretation protects your self-esteem. It prevents one person's decision from defining your entire identity. Another layer of emotional freedom comes from reclaiming your energy. When you beg for love, your energy is constantly outward. You are focused on what they are doing, what they are thinking, how they are feeling. You are trying to adjust yourself accordingly. But when you stop begging, your energy returns inward. You begin focusing on your growth, your passions, your peace. You ask yourself deeper questions. What kind of life do I want to build? What kind of partner truly aligns with my values? What habits can strengthen my confidence? Your attention shifts from securing someone else to strengthening yourself. This inward shift builds stability. The more stable you become internally, the less dependent you are on external validation. You no longer need constant reassurance to feel secure. You do not need someone to choose you every day to believe you are worthy. You understand that your value is constant, not conditional. And because of this understanding, you approach relationships differently. You do not beg to be included. You do not chase someone who is uncertain. You observe, you allow. You respond calmly rather than react desperately. There is also a dignity that comes with emotional freedom. When you stop begging, you stop oversharing to gain sympathy. You stop proving your loyalty excessively. You stop negotiating your boundaries to appear more desirable. You stand quietly in your truth. If someone chooses you, they choose you freely. If someone walks away, you let them go without humiliation. You may feel sadness, but you do not feel shame. You do not feel the need to lower yourself to maintain proximity. Buddhism reminds us that attachment creates suffering because it ties our happiness to impermanent things. People are impermanent, feelings are impermanent, circumstances are impermanent. When you cling to something that naturally changes, you create resistance. That resistance becomes pain. Emotional freedom comes when you accept impermanence instead of fighting it. You allow people to come and go without making their presence the foundation of your identity. You understand that relationships are experiences, not definitions of who you are. When you stop begging for love, you also stop competing. You stop comparing yourself to others. You stop wondering why someone else was chosen over you. You understand that love is not a contest. It is alignment. And if someone aligns with another person more than with you, that does not reduce your value. It simply reveals a difference in compatibility. This awareness protects you from self-blame. It keeps your confidence intact. Over time, emotional freedom transforms the way you feel about solitude as well. Being alone no longer feels like evidence of failure. It feels like stability. It feels like control over your own emotional state. You no longer rush into connections out of fear. You take your time. You observe consistency. You look for reciprocity. You prioritize peace over intensity. And because you are not desperate, you are less likely to settle for less than you deserve. One of the most beautiful aspects of emotional freedom is that it attracts healthier love naturally. When you are not begging, you radiate calm confidence. You are not trying to convince anyone of your worth. You are simply embodying it. This energy is different. It is not loud, but it is strong. It communicates that you value yourself. And people who value themselves are drawn to others who do the same. Healthy love recognizes self-respect. It is built on equality, not imbalance. Even if love does not arrive immediately, emotional freedom still feels rewarding. You wake up without anxiety about someone's behavior. You go to sleep without replaying conversations obsessively. You make decisions based on your values rather than your fears. You begin to trust yourself more deeply. That trust becomes your anchor. It becomes the foundation upon which future connections are built. Ultimately, stopping the act of begging is not about becoming cold or detached from humanity. It is about becoming aligned with your dignity. It is about refusing to trade your peace for temporary closeness. It is about understanding that love should enhance your life, not destabilize it. And when you reach that understanding fully, you feel lighter, you feel stronger, you feel steady. In that steadiness, you realize something powerful. You are not chasing love anymore. You are not waiting to be chosen to feel valuable. You are living from a place of inner sufficiency, and from that place, every connection becomes optional rather than necessary. You no longer approach relationships with fear of loss. You approach them with awareness and freedom. This is emotional liberation. This is the moment when attachment loosens its grip. This is when you no longer beg for love because you have remembered something essential. You have remembered that your worth was never dependent on another person's decision. It was always rooted within you. And once you live from that truth, you walk differently. You speak differently. You love differently. You become free. 10. The deepest love you will ever experience begins within you. There is a powerful misunderstanding that many people carry quietly in their hearts, and that misunderstanding is the belief that love is something that must come from outside in order to feel complete. From childhood, you may have been taught that love arrives when someone chooses you, when someone admires you, when someone commits to you. Movies, stories, and even society itself often repeat the same message. Happiness begins when another person enters your life. But Buddhism gently challenges this narrative and invites you to look inward instead of outward. It asks you to consider a radical truth. The deepest love you will ever experience is not the love you receive from someone else. It is the love you cultivate within yourself. When you beg for love, you are unknowingly placing your emotional survival in someone else's hands. You are saying, without words, "My happiness depends on you." You are waiting for validation to feel secure. You are waiting for affection to feel worthy. You are waiting for reassurance to feel calm. And as long as your sense of peace depends on external confirmation, you will always feel unstable, because external circumstances are impermanent. People change, feelings shift, priorities evolve. When your inner world is tied to something that can disappear at any time, fear becomes constant. Buddhism teaches that true peace arises from within, not from possession or control. It emphasizes awareness, self-compassion, and detachment from clinging. Loving yourself is not about arrogance or self-obsession. It is about recognizing your inherent value as a conscious being. It is about treating yourself with the same kindness, patience, and understanding that you so easily offer to others. When you begin to cultivate this inner love, you stop approaching relationships as a way to fill a void. Instead, you approach them as an extension of your already complete life. Self-love begins with awareness. It begins with observing how you speak to yourself in moments of rejection or disappointment. When someone leaves, do you attack yourself mentally? Do you replay your flaws and criticize your worth? Or do you respond with compassion, acknowledging that pain is part of the human experience? The way you treat yourself during difficult times reveals whether your love is conditional or unconditional. If your self-worth rises and falls based on external approval, then your love for yourself is still fragile. But when you can sit with pain without turning against yourself, you begin to build emotional resilience. There is also a deep healing that occurs when you stop seeking constant validation. Many people beg for love because they are trying to heal old wounds. Perhaps there were moments in your past when you felt unseen or unimportant. Perhaps affection was inconsistent. Perhaps you learned that you had to perform or achieve in order to receive approval. Without realizing it, you may carry those patterns into adulthood, seeking partners who replicate familiar dynamics. You may chase someone's attention not because they are aligned with you, but because winning their love feels like healing a past rejection. Buddhism invites you to heal differently. Instead of seeking completion through another person, It encourages you to sit with your wounds gently, to observe them without judgment, to understand that your desire to be chosen often comes from a place of unmet needs. When you begin to meet those needs yourself through self-respect, healthy boundaries, and emotional awareness, you break the cycle of desperation. You no longer approach love as a rescue mission. You approach it as a shared journey. Another powerful shift happens when you begin loving yourself deeply. Your standards change. You no longer tolerate being half-prioritized. You no longer accept inconsistency disguised as passion. You no longer interpret chaos as chemistry, because when you truly value yourself, you understand that love should feel safe, it should feel stable, it should feel mutual. And if it does not, you have the strength to walk away without feeling that you are losing your only chance at happiness. Self-love also transforms your relationship with solitude. When you enjoy your own presence, you no longer fear being alone. You use solitude to grow, to reflect, to nurture your passions. You discover that your company is peaceful. You begin to trust your decisions. You develop clarity about what you want in a partner, rather than accepting whatever appears just to avoid loneliness. This clarity protects you from repeating patterns that once caused suffering. There is also an important spiritual dimension to loving yourself. Buddhism teaches that clinging to identity causes suffering. When you define yourself entirely through relationships, you create a fragile identity. But when you root your identity in awareness and presence, you become stable. You are not just someone's partner. You are not just someone's choice. You are a being with depth, consciousness, and potential. Your existence has value independent of romantic validation. When you cultivate love within, you radiate a different energy. You do not chase. You do not beg. You do not try to impress. You simply exist authentically. This authenticity is attractive not because it is loud, but because it is grounded. It communicates confidence without arrogance. It communicates peace without indifference. And this kind of presence draws healthier connections naturally, because it is not rooted in neediness. It is rooted in sufficiency. Loving yourself also means forgiving yourself. Forgiving yourself for staying too long. Forgiving yourself for ignoring red flags. Forgiving yourself for loving deeply. Compassion toward yourself dissolves shame. It reminds you that your past decisions were made from the level of awareness you had at the time. Instead of criticizing yourself for being vulnerable, you honor your capacity to care. Vulnerability is not weakness. It is humanity. And when you combine vulnerability with wisdom, you create strength. Over time, self-love becomes your foundation. You wake up without needing someone else's message to feel worthy. You move through your day without constant comparison. You make decisions aligned with your values rather than your fears. You no longer seek love to escape loneliness. You welcome love as an addition to your fullness. This shift changes everything. Relationships become partnerships between equals, not rescues between broken halves. It is also important to understand that loving yourself does not eliminate pain entirely. You will still experience disappointment. You will still feel sadness when connections end. But the difference is that you will not collapse. You will not interpret loss as proof of inadequacy. You will grieve with dignity. You will heal with patience. And you will continue forward without abandoning yourself in the process. The deepest love you will ever experience is the love that remains when everyone else leaves. It is the love that stays when messages stop. It is the love that supports you when plans change. It is the love that whispers, "You are enough," even in silence. That love is within you. It has always been there, waiting for your attention. When you finally understand this, begging becomes unnecessary. You no longer chase validation. You no longer compete for affection. You no longer compromise your dignity for attention. You stand calmly in your own presence. You allow love to meet you where you are, rather than lowering yourself to meet someone's inconsistency. In the end, you realize something profound. The love you were searching for in others was a reflection of the love you needed to cultivate within. Once you begin nurturing that inner foundation, everything changes. You no longer feel incomplete when alone. You no longer feel threatened by rejection. You no longer feel desperate for selection. You feel whole. And from that wholeness, love flows differently. It becomes an exchange between two complete individuals, not a transaction between two people seeking rescue. It becomes peaceful rather than anxious, stable rather than chaotic, mutual rather than one-sided. This is the awakening that Buddhism gently points toward. You were never meant to beg for love, because you were never meant to believe you were incomplete. The deepest love you will ever experience begins within you, and once you cultivate it fully, you will never again confuse desperation with devotion. In that realization, you finally stand free. You are enough, even alone. 11. The moment you stop chasing, the right energy finds you. There is a subtle but powerful shift that happens when a person finally stops chasing love. It is not dramatic. It is not loud. It does not always involve blocking numbers or making grand announcements. It happens internally. It happens when you decide that your peace is more valuable than someone's uncertainty. It happens when you choose dignity over desperation. And in that moment, something inside you becomes steady in a way it never was before. For a long time, you may have believed that effort alone could secure love. You may have thought that if you showed more patience, more loyalty, more understanding, then the other person would eventually match your energy. You may have tried to become easier to love by becoming smaller. You adjusted your schedule, your boundaries, your tone, even your standards. And while doing so, you convinced yourself that you were simply being committed. But deep inside, there was tension. Because commitment is mutual, and chasing is not. Buddhism teaches that attachment creates suffering because it binds your emotional state to something outside your control. When you chase someone who is uncertain, your mind becomes restless. You are always trying to secure their affection. You look for signs that they care. You search for reassurance in small gestures. You cling to potential rather than reality. This mental agitation becomes exhausting. It drains your focus. It weakens your clarity. It makes you doubt yourself. But when you finally stop chasing, your energy changes direction. Instead of moving outward in pursuit, it settles inward in awareness. You begin to notice how much of your stress came from trying to control what could never be controlled. You realize that love cannot be forced into existence by persistence. It must arise naturally between two willing hearts. The moment you accept this truth fully, you stop fighting against what is. Stopping the chase does not mean you stop caring. It means you stop forcing. It means you stop trying to convince someone of your value. It means you stop attempting to negotiate basic respect. It means you allow someone's actions to speak louder than your hopes. When you adopt this mindset, clarity replaces confusion. You begin to see patterns that you previously ignored. You recognize imbalance without denying it. You understand when effort is one-sided without justifying it. There is also a deep psychological freedom in no longer pursuing someone who is unsure about you. When you chase, you are constantly seeking validation. You are waiting for confirmation that you matter. This creates emotional dependence, but when you stop chasing, you reclaim that validation. You no longer need them to confirm your worth because you have already recognized it yourself. This internal recognition builds confidence, and confidence does not need to beg. Buddhism emphasizes non-attachment, not as emotional coldness, but as emotional balance. Non-attachment means you can care deeply without losing yourself. It means you can love someone while accepting the possibility that they may not choose you. It means you are open without being desperate. This balance protects your peace. It allows you to experience connection without fear of collapse if it ends. When you stop chasing, something else happens that many people do not expect. The dynamic shifts. Sometimes the person who felt pressured by your pursuit begins to feel the absence of that energy. Sometimes they become curious. Sometimes they reflect. But whether they return or not becomes less important because your peace is no longer dependent on their response. You are not stepping back to manipulate. You are stepping back to protect your alignment. There is also a spiritual dimension to this shift. Buddhism teaches that when you cling, you disturb the natural flow of life. When you release, you create space for alignment. When you stop forcing love with someone who resists, you open yourself to the possibility of a connection that flows effortlessly. You begin to trust that what is meant for you will not require humiliation to maintain. You understand that chasing someone who is uncertain prevents you from meeting someone who is certain. Another powerful aspect of stopping the chase is the restoration of self-respect. Every time you pursue someone who treats you as optional, you subconsciously tell yourself that you are not worthy of full commitment. But when you stop, you send a different message inward. You communicate to yourself that you deserve reciprocity, you deserve clarity, you deserve consistency. This internal message strengthens your identity. It reinforces your standards. It builds inner stability. Over time, this stability becomes visible. You walk differently, you speak differently, you approach relationships differently. You are no longer trying to impress or secure someone's attention. You are simply being yourself. And authenticity carries a different energy than desperation. It is calm, it is confident, it is grounded. This grounded presence naturally attracts healthier interactions because it reflects self-awareness rather than insecurity. It is important to understand that stopping the chase may initially feel uncomfortable. You may experience withdrawal from the constant emotional intensity. You may feel the urge to reach out or check in, but if you sit with that discomfort instead of acting on it, you build resilience. You prove to yourself that you are capable of standing still. You learn that your worth does not diminish when you are not pursuing someone. Eventually, you realize that the peace you gain from not chasing is more valuable than the temporary excitement of uncertain attention. You begin to prioritize emotional stability over dramatic intensity. You prefer consistency over chaos. You value clarity over confusion. And in this shift, your standards evolve naturally. When the right energy enters your life, it does not require persuasion. It does not require repeated explanations of your value. It does not leave you guessing. It meets you halfway. It communicates openly. It respects your time and boundaries. It chooses you without hesitation. And because you are no longer desperate, you recognize this difference clearly. You do not confuse inconsistency with passion. You do not romanticize emotional unavailability. You see reality as it is. Stopping the chase also teaches patience. You understand that meaningful connection cannot be rushed. You allow time to reveal character. You observe actions rather than promises. You trust your intuition. You do not force outcomes to avoid loneliness. You would rather wait for alignment than settle for imbalance. This patience is not passive, it is intentional. It reflects inner confidence. As you continue walking this path, you notice something else. The need to be chosen begins to fade. You are not seeking validation from every interaction. You are not measuring your worth through someone's response time. You are simply living. You are investing in your growth. You are nurturing your peace. You are building a life that feels fulfilling on its own. And from this place of fulfillment, Love becomes an enhancement rather than a necessity. This is emotional maturity. This is spiritual awareness. This is the moment when attachment loosens and clarity strengthens. You no longer feel compelled to pursue what runs from you. You allow it to go without resentment. You trust that alignment does not require pressure. You understand that love should feel mutual, not forced. In the end, stopping the chase is not about losing someone. It is about finding yourself. It is about reclaiming the energy you were pouring into uncertainty and redirecting it towards stability. It is about remembering that your worth is not dependent on someone else's attention. It is about recognizing that what truly aligns with you will not require pursuit. And when you finally stand still in that awareness, something beautiful happens. You are no longer begging. You are no longer chasing. You are simply present. And from that presence, the right energy finds you naturally. You become calm instead of anxious, grounded instead of desperate, free instead of attached. And in that freedom, you realize once again the truth that has always been there. You were never meant to beg for love. 12. You do not lose love, you lose illusion, and in that loss you gain yourself. There is a moment in every deep emotional journey when you begin to see clearly what you once refused to see. It is not the moment when someone leaves. It is not the moment when a message stops. It is not even the moment when you realize the relationship is ending. It is the moment when you understand that what you were holding on to was not entirely love. It was also illusion. And when that illusion falls away, it hurts. Not because you lost something real, but because you lost what you hoped it could become. Buddhism teaches that suffering is often rooted in illusion. We do not suffer only because something ends. We suffer because we believed it was supposed to last forever. We do not suffer only because someone changed. We suffer because we imagined they would remain exactly as we needed them to be. The mind creates expectations, attachments, and fantasies, and when reality does not align with those mental constructions, pain arises. This pain feels personal. It feels like rejection. But often, what we are grieving is not the person alone. We are grieving the story we built around them. When you beg for love, you are usually holding on to an illusion. You are holding on to the idea that if you try hard enough, if you give enough, if you wait long enough, things will transform into the version you imagined. You are not only attached to the person, you are attached to the future you saw with them, the plans, the comfort, the validation, the identity of being chosen, and when that future dissolves, it can feel like losing part of yourself. But here is the deeper truth that Buddhism gently reveals. You are not losing yourself when someone leaves. You are losing the illusion that your completeness depended on them. And in that loss, something profound happens. You begin to rediscover who you are without the projection, without the fantasy, without the desperate hope that someone else would define your happiness. Illusion feels comforting because it gives certainty. It says, "This will work if I try harder." It says, "They will change if I love them more." It says, "I cannot be whole without them." These thoughts feel powerful because they are fueled by emotion. But when you step back and observe them with awareness, you see that they are stories, not truths. You see that clinging to them has created anxiety. You see that holding on to a version of someone who does not fully exist has created internal conflict. Letting the illusion fall is painful because it requires acceptance. Acceptance that someone may not love you in the way you need. Acceptance that potential is not the same as reality. Acceptance that no amount of sacrifice can force mutual alignment. But acceptance is also freeing, because once you stop fighting reality, your energy shifts. You are no longer investing in a narrative that exhausts you. You are no longer trying to turn possibility into certainty. You begin standing in truth. This shift is not cold or bitter. It is aware. It is mature, it is calm. It does not involve hatred toward the other person, it involves clarity about yourself. You begin to see that you were not actually losing love. You were losing attachment. You were losing the idea that someone else was responsible for filling your emotional void. And when that belief dissolves, you gain independence. Independence in this context does not mean isolation. It means emotional sovereignty. It means your sense of identity is no longer entangled with someone else's choices. It means your self-worth does not rise and fall based on whether someone texts you back. It means you understand that love is meaningful, but it is not your foundation. Your foundation is awareness. Your foundation is self-respect. Your foundation is inner stability. There is also a deep humility in recognizing illusion. You may look back and realize that you ignored signs. You may see that you justified behavior that did not align with your values. You may acknowledge that you were attached to potential more than consistency. Instead of shaming yourself for this, you approach it with compassion. You understand that attachment can cloud perception. You understand that longing can distort clarity, and with this understanding, you grow wiser rather than bitter. Buddhism teaches impermanence, not to create fear, but to cultivate peace. When you accept that everything changes, you stop gripping so tightly. You appreciate connection without trying to imprison it. You experience love without demanding guarantees. And when something ends, you grieve, but you do not collapse, because you know that endings are part of life's natural rhythm. The illusion that you lost love often hides the truth that you gained yourself. You gained awareness of your standards. You gained clarity about what you will not tolerate again. You gained strength from surviving disappointment. You gained deeper understanding of your emotional patterns. These gains are invisible at first because pain overshadows them. But over time, you begin to see how much you have evolved. You may notice that you are no longer willing to beg. You may notice that you walk away sooner from imbalance. You may notice that you value peace more than intensity. These are signs of growth. They are signs that you are no longer operating from illusion. You are operating from awareness. There is also something profoundly empowering about realizing that the love you were chasing externally was always a reflection of something internal. The longing you felt was not weakness. It was a desire for connection. But connection begins within. When you cultivate self-compassion, self-trust, and self-respect, you stop looking for someone to rescue you from incompleteness. You realize you were never incomplete. Losing illusion is often confused with losing love, because illusion feels magical. It is dramatic. It is emotionally charged. It feels like destiny. But real love is not built on fantasy. It is built on mutual effort, clarity, and alignment. When illusion fades, it creates space for authenticity. You become more honest with yourself. You stop pretending that crumbs are enough. You stop convincing yourself that confusion is romance. This process is not easy. There may be nights when you miss the idea of what could have been. There may be moments when memories feel heavy, but with awareness, you begin to see those memories differently. You see them as experiences that shaped you, not definitions of you. You understand that the relationship was a chapter, not your entire story. As time passes, the pain softens, not because you forget, but because you understand. You understand that what left was not meant to stay. You understand that clinging would have prolonged suffering. You understand that illusion had to dissolve for truth to emerge. And truth, even when painful, is always liberating. You stand differently after this realization. You do not chase illusions anymore. You do not project fantasies onto uncertain behavior. You do not confuse intensity with compatibility. You see clearly. You move slowly. You value consistency over promises. You protect your peace without apology. And most importantly, You no longer beg, because begging was rooted in illusion, the illusion that you needed someone else to complete you. Now you know that completeness is internal. It is cultivated through awareness, discipline, and compassion toward yourself. In the end, you did not lose love. You lost illusion. And in losing illusion, you gained clarity. You gained strength. You gained yourself. You now understand that love should meet you at your level of self-respect. It should not require you to diminish yourself. It should not force you to abandon your standards. It should not make you question your worth daily. If it does, it is not love aligned with your growth. This awareness is freedom. You walk forward lighter, wiser, calmer. You do not fear endings the way you once did. You do not cling to potential the way you once did. You do not beg for love the way you once did. Because now you know something that cannot be undone. You are whole. You are steady. You are enough. Even alone. 13. When you choose yourself fully, love becomes a gift, not a lifeline. There is a stage in emotional growth where something quiet but irreversible happens inside you. It is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not come with anger or revenge or the desire to prove anything to anyone. It comes with alignment. It comes when you finally choose yourself fully, not halfway, not conditionally, not only when it is convenient, but completely. And when that shift happens, love changes its form in your life. It is no longer a lifeline you cling to in order to survive. It becomes a gift you can receive without fear. For a long time, you may have approached love like oxygen, something necessary, something urgent, something that, without it, would make you feel like you were suffocating. That urgency often leads to desperation, and desperation leads to compromise. You lower standards. You silence intuition. You accept inconsistency. You convince yourself that partial affection is enough because the alternative feels like emptiness. But Buddhism teaches that emptiness is misunderstood. Emptiness does not mean nothingness. It means spaciousness. It means the absence of clinging. It means the ability to exist without constant grasping. When you choose yourself fully, you stop grasping. You stop looking at love as survival. You begin to see it as enrichment. And enrichment does not require begging. Choosing yourself fully means honoring your boundaries, even when it risks losing someone. It means speaking your truth even when it feels uncomfortable. It means walking away from what disturbs your peace, even if your heart still cares. It means prioritizing alignment over attachment. This level of self-respect is not built overnight. It is built through awareness, through pain, through reflection, through lessons learned when you stayed too long and gave too much. At first, choosing yourself may feel selfish, especially if you are used to overgiving. If you are used to sacrificing your needs to keep others comfortable. But there is a difference between selfishness and self-honoring. Selfishness disregards others. Self-honoring includes yourself. And for many people, including yourself, feels unfamiliar. But it is necessary. When you choose yourself fully, you begin to trust your intuition again. You stop overriding that quiet inner voice that says something feels off. You stop justifying behavior that makes you anxious. You stop accepting explanations that do not align with actions. This trust becomes your compass. It guides you toward connections that feel stable rather than chaotic. It protects you from repeating patterns that once drained you. There is also a powerful emotional stability that forms when you choose yourself. You no longer feel shattered by someone's inconsistency. You may feel disappointment, but not devastation. You may feel sadness, but not self-doubt, because your worth is no longer dependent on their participation. It is rooted in your awareness of yourself. Love, in this stage, becomes lighter. It is no longer heavy with fear. It is no longer tangled in anxiety. You do not feel the need to monitor someone constantly. You do not feel threatened by their independence. You do not feel incomplete when you are alone. You are grounded. And from that grounded place, love flows more naturally. Buddhism emphasizes the concept of non-attachment, and this does not mean detachment from love. It means loving without clinging. It means appreciating someone's presence without demanding permanence. It means offering your heart without sacrificing your dignity. When you choose yourself fully, you can love deeply without losing yourself. You can connect without collapsing. Another shift that happens when you choose yourself is that you become more selective, not out of arrogance, but out of clarity. You understand your values more clearly. You understand what kind of communication feels healthy. You understand what level of effort is necessary for balance. And because you respect yourself, you do not settle for less than mutual alignment. This clarity changes your energy. You are no longer chasing. You are no longer proving. You are no longer auditioning for affection. You are simply living in alignment with your truth. And this presence is powerful. It attracts people who are also grounded. It repels those who seek imbalance. It filters your environment naturally. When love enters your life from this place, it feels different. It does not feel urgent. It does not feel like rescue. It feels like partnership. It feels like two complete individuals choosing to walk together. There is no begging. There is no desperation. There is no confusion about where you stand. There is mutual effort, mutual respect, mutual clarity. And if love does not enter immediately, you are still at peace, because you are not waiting to feel complete. You are already living fully. You are building your life, nurturing your growth, strengthening your character, exploring your passions. Love becomes something that complements your journey, not something that defines it. Choosing yourself fully also means forgiving yourself fully. Forgiving yourself for the times you begged. Forgiving yourself for the moments you ignored your worth. Forgiving yourself for confusing attachment with devotion. Every lesson becomes part of your wisdom. Nothing is wasted. Every heartbreak becomes a teacher. Every disappointment becomes a refining force. There is a dignity in this stage of growth that cannot be faked. It is not about pretending you do not care. It is about caring in a balanced way. It is about recognizing that you can love someone and still choose yourself, that you can grieve someone and still respect your boundaries, that you can feel longing and still maintain clarity. When you choose yourself fully, you no longer chase illusions. You no longer cling to potential. You evaluate consistency over promises. You pay attention to actions more than words. You trust your experience. You learn from patterns. You become wiser without becoming closed. Over time, you begin to see relationships not as proof of worth, but as reflections of alignment. If someone stays, it is because there is harmony. If someone leaves, it is because paths diverge. Neither event defines your value. Both are simply movements within life's impermanence. And this understanding frees you. You no longer fear loss the way you once did. You no longer cling to outcomes. You no longer beg to be chosen. You know that what aligns with your self-respect will remain naturally, and what does not align will fall away without destroying you. In the end, choosing yourself fully is the turning point. It is the moment when love stops being a lifeline and starts being a gift. It is the moment when you stop abandoning yourself to keep someone else. It is the moment when you stand firmly in your own worth, regardless of who stands beside you. From that place, love becomes beautiful rather than desperate, peaceful rather than anxious, mutual rather than one-sided. And even in moments of solitude, you do not feel incomplete. You feel centered. You feel grounded. You feel whole. because you no longer need love to survive. You welcome it when it comes, and if it leaves, you remain standing. That is freedom. That is growth. That is the quiet power of someone who finally chose themselves. And in that choice, you remember once again the truth that cannot be shaken. You were never meant to beg for love. You were meant to embody it. 14. The love that stays does not need to be fought for. There is a silent exhaustion that comes from constantly fighting to keep someone in your life. You may not call it fighting, you may call it effort, patience, loyalty, or commitment. But deep inside, you know when you are struggling to maintain something that should be flowing naturally. You know the difference between mutual effort and one-sided persistence. And one of the most liberating realizations you can ever reach is this: the love that is truly aligned with you does not require a battle to survive. For a long time, you may have believed that love must be intense to be real. You may have associated struggle with depth. You may have thought that proving your dedication through sacrifice would secure permanence. But Buddhism teaches that when something is forced, it is rooted in attachment, not harmony. Harmony does not strain. Harmony does not require convincing. Harmony exists when two energies naturally move in the same direction. When you find yourself constantly trying to fix misunderstandings alone, constantly adjusting your needs to keep peace, constantly explaining your worth, it is a sign that balance is missing. Love that stays does not make you beg for clarity. It does not leave you guessing where you stand. It does not create a constant undercurrent of anxiety. Instead, it creates stability, and stability is quiet. It does not shout for attention, it simply remains. Buddhism speaks often of right effort, effort that is balanced, intentional, and grounded in awareness. Right effort is not about exhausting yourself to hold on to something slipping away. It is about nurturing what is mutual. When both people are aligned, effort feels shared. It feels cooperative rather than competitive. It feels like building together, not chasing alone. When love requires you to fight constantly for reassurance, you begin living in emotional defense mode. You anticipate distance. You fear silence. You overanalyze tone. Your nervous system becomes alert rather than relaxed. Over time, this vigilance becomes normal, and you mistake anxiety for passion. But passion rooted in insecurity is not sustainable. It burns quickly and leaves exhaustion behind. The love that stays feels different. It feels calm even during disagreement. It feels secure even during distance. It feels clear even during change. There is communication without games. There is commitment without pressure. There is affection without manipulation. When love is aligned, you do not feel like you must constantly prove your value. Your presence is enough. One of the hardest truths to accept is that sometimes you are fighting for something that has already emotionally ended. You may sense withdrawal. You may notice inconsistency. But instead of stepping back, you step forward harder. You try to fix. You try to save. You try to restore what once felt effortless. But when love requires constant rescue, it may no longer be love in its balanced form. It may have shifted into obligation, habit, or attachment. Buddhism teaches acceptance of impermanence. Relationships change, feelings shift, and sometimes what once flowed freely begins to resist. Clinging to what no longer moves naturally creates suffering. Letting go of the need to fight does not mean you do not care. It means you respect the natural rhythm of life. It means you recognize when something is no longer reciprocal. The love that stays does not require you to shrink. It does not demand that you sacrifice your identity. It does not expect you to ignore your intuition. It does not punish you for having boundaries. It honors who you are. It encourages your growth. It supports your independence. It understands that two people can stand side by side without controlling each other. There is also dignity in realizing that you do not have to compete for someone's affection. If someone sees your value, they do not need to be persuaded. If someone wants to stay, they do not need to be chased. The more you internalize this truth, the less you feel compelled to exhaust yourself in pursuit. You begin to conserve your energy for connections that are equally invested. When you stop fighting for love that resists you, something shifts internally. You may feel grief at first. You may feel the weight of letting go. But beneath that grief, there is relief. Relief from constant effort, relief from uncertainty, relief from trying to control what cannot be controlled. That relief creates space, and in that space, you begin to rediscover calm. It is important to understand that healthy love still requires effort, but that effort feels balanced. It feels chosen rather than demanded. It feels like collaboration rather than survival. There are still conversations, there are still compromises, but there is no desperation, there is no fear that one mistake will erase everything. There is trust. Trust is the foundation of love that stays. Not blind trust, but trust built through consistent behavior. Trust that both people are equally committed. Trust that issues will be addressed rather than avoided. Trust that respect will remain even during conflict. This kind of trust cannot grow in an environment where one person is constantly fighting to keep the other engaged. Buddhism also teaches non-attachment, which allows you to love without gripping. When you release the need to control outcomes, you allow love to reveal its true form. If it is meant to stay, it will stay without struggle. If it is meant to leave, fighting will only prolong suffering. Non-attachment gives you clarity. It helps you differentiate between connection and clinging. When you embody this awareness, your standards shift naturally. You no longer romanticize inconsistency. You no longer confuse chaos with chemistry. You no longer believe that intensity equals depth. You begin valuing steadiness. You appreciate presence. You prioritize respect. And because you are not fighting, you can observe more clearly. There is also strength in walking away from what requires constant battle. It is not defeat. It is alignment. It is recognizing that love should not feel like war. It should feel like peace. Even when there are challenges, there should be mutual willingness to work through them without power struggles or emotional games. Over time, you begin to notice a difference in how you feel. You are not constantly drained. You are not overthinking every interaction. You are not strategizing how to keep someone interested. You are simply present. And presence is powerful. It attracts authenticity. It repels manipulation. It filters connections naturally. The love that stays is not loud. It is not dramatic. It does not need constant proof. It feels natural. It feels safe. It feels grounded. You do not wake up wondering where you stand. You do not go to sleep fearing abandonment. You feel secure because actions align with words. If love in your life has felt like constant struggle, it does not mean you are unworthy. It means you were attached to something misaligned. And misalignment is not failure. It is information. It teaches you what does not work so you can recognize what does. As you grow in awareness, you stop mistaking effort for compatibility. You stop believing that if you just try harder, you can force harmony. You understand that harmony must exist on both sides. You cannot carry a relationship alone and expect balance. In the end, the most peaceful realization you can reach is this: you do not have to fight to be loved properly. The love that is meant for you will not require you to beg, chase, or exhaust yourself. It will meet you halfway. It will stay because it wants to, not because you forced it to. And when you truly understand this, you release the battle. You release the need to prove. You release the desperation to secure. You stand calmly in your own worth. You allow love to flow naturally. And if it flows away, you let it go without war. Because now you know. The love that stays does not need to be fought for. It stays because it is aligned. And you are enough whether it stays or not. 15. When you realize you were always whole, everything changes. There is a final realization that brings deep peace to the heart, and it is this. You were never broken, you were never incomplete. You were never lacking something essential that another person needed to provide. For a long time, you may have believed that love was the missing piece, that once someone chose you, once someone committed fully, once someone stayed permanently, you would finally feel secure and complete. But Buddhism gently reveals a truth that transforms everything. Wholeness is not something another person gives you. It is something you recognize within yourself. The idea that you are incomplete without someone else is one of the most powerful illusions the ego holds on to. It creates urgency, it creates fear, it creates desperation. It convinces you that being alone is evidence of deficiency. And when you believe that narrative, you begin chasing love not from abundance, but from emptiness. You begin seeking someone to rescue you from loneliness. You begin bargaining with your own dignity just to secure closeness. But the moment you truly see that you were whole all along, the chasing stops naturally, the begging fades, the anxiety softens, because you no longer see love as something that defines your value. You see it as something that complements your already existing worth. Buddhism teaches that suffering arises from misperception. We suffer not because we are incomplete, but because we believe we are. This belief shapes our behavior. It influences our relationships. It drives us to tolerate imbalance. When you think you need someone to complete you, you give them too much power. You make them responsible for your emotional stability. And that responsibility is heavy for both sides. When you recognize your wholeness, something shifts internally. You stop asking, "Why wasn't I enough?" And you start asking, "Why did I believe I wasn't enough?" That question is transformative. It redirects your focus inward. It allows you to examine your conditioning. Perhaps you learned early on that approval equals love. Perhaps you were praised only when you performed well. Perhaps affection felt conditional. Those experiences can create a belief that you must earn love to deserve it. But awareness dissolves conditioning. When you observe these patterns without judgment, you begin to detach from them. You see that your worth was never dependent on performance. It was never dependent on selection. It was never dependent on someone staying. It was inherent. This realization does not make you indifferent to love. It makes you balanced. You can love deeply without fear. You can give generously without self-erasure. You can receive affection without becoming dependent, because you know that even if love changes form, your core remains stable. Wholeness also changes how you respond to endings. When a relationship ends, you may still feel sadness, you may still miss the connection, but you do not feel annihilated, you do not feel erased. You do not feel like your identity has collapsed, because your identity was never built solely around that relationship. It was built around awareness, values, growth, and self-understanding. Buddhism often emphasizes the concept of self-awareness as liberation. When you understand yourself deeply, you become less reactive. You are not easily destabilized by external events. You see life as a flow rather than a threat. You understand that relationships are chapters, not definitions. They add to your journey, but they do not define your existence. There is also a profound peace in knowing that love is not scarce. Scarcity thinking fuels desperation. It convinces you that if this person leaves, there will be no one else. It tells you that this opportunity was your only chance. But when you know you are whole, you do not operate from scarcity. You operate from trust. You trust that alignment exists beyond one individual. You trust that what is meant for you will not require humiliation to remain. This trust creates calm, and calm is powerful. It prevents impulsive decisions. It prevents settling for less. It prevents clinging to potential. You evaluate relationships with clarity rather than fear. You pay attention to consistency rather than promises. You honor your boundaries rather than negotiating them. Wholeness also deepens self-compassion. You forgive yourself for past begging. You forgive yourself for moments of insecurity. You forgive yourself for loving too much in the wrong direction. Instead of criticizing your vulnerability, you honor it. You understand that your desire for connection was human. You understand that your attachment came from longing, not weakness. As you grow in this awareness, your presence changes. You are not trying to impress. You are not trying to secure. You are not trying to prove. You are simply existing in your authenticity. And authenticity carries quiet strength. It does not need validation to survive. Love, when it comes from this place, feels different. It feels like partnership between two whole individuals. There is no need to merge identities to feel secure. There is no fear of abandonment dominating every interaction. There is space, there is trust, there is mutual respect. And if love ends, there is sadness, but not collapse. You begin to understand that you were never searching for someone to complete you. You were searching for someone to share your completeness with. That distinction changes everything. It transforms desperation into discernment. It transforms attachment into appreciation. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is not about acquiring something new. It is about recognizing what was always present. In the same way, your wholeness is not something you need to build from scratch. It is something you uncover. It is something that was hidden beneath fear and conditioning. When you uncover it, you feel grounded, you feel steady, you feel enough. Not because someone told you that you are, but because you see it clearly yourself. You stop begging for love because you no longer believe love defines your worth. You welcome love, but you do not depend on it. You appreciate connection, but you do not cling to it. You allow relationships to unfold naturally without forcing or fighting. And in this final stage of growth, something beautiful happens. You no longer fear being alone. You no longer fear endings. You no longer fear rejection, because none of those experiences threaten your core. Your core is rooted in awareness. You understand that you were whole before they arrived. You remain whole if they leave. You will continue to be whole no matter what changes. And this realization is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet. It is stable. It is deeply peaceful. You walk differently with this awareness. You love differently. You choose differently. You live differently. Because you finally know. You were never incomplete. You were never meant to beg. You were never lacking. You were always whole.